Good afternoon, members of the media, wider listening and looking public of Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to this week's post-cabinet press conference. First of all, I'd like to start off by offering our sincerest condolences and sympathy to the family of Mr. Angelo Bisessa Singh. Whilst we were in cabinet, the news was brought to us on his passing. We're very saddened to hear that, and we wish them all of God's blessings in this time of sadness, and we will remember the works of his life and how positively he contributed to our landscape in Trinidad and Tobago. Later on today, an official release will come from the Office of the Prime Minister. I welcome my two colleagues, cabinet colleagues here today, the Attorney General and the Minister of National Security, and we'll start off with the Attorney General addressing you.
I've come to report on two very significant areas of work that the government has managed to conclude. We are going to speak specifically to improvements in the anti-terrorism architecture of Trinidad and Tobago, and specifically management of the motor vehicle and road traffic laws of Trinidad and Tobago, specifically because both of these articulate squarely within the anti-crime plan that the government has. Now, if I could turn attention specifically to the anti-terrorism, I can inform that Cabinet has just approved the result of many months of work by way of specific legislation. As you're aware, in 2015, Trinidad and Tobago received its fourth round mutual evaluation report from the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. And that task force held that Trinidad and Tobago was in significant deficiencies with respect to its anti-terrorism laws. And very importantly, that the application of our laws had not shown any real effect in that there were no cases before the courts, etc. Taking that into mind and watching the developments in the national community and in the international community with respect to anti-terrorism, we engaged in a very aggressive review of the situation, which resulted in legislative proposals as well as operational proposals. Specifically, on the legislative side, we are now able to come with a very, very comprehensive piece of law which seeks to amend the Anti-Terrorism Act of Trinidad and Tobago. And I will say that that's part one. There's a part two, which will come very shortly before Cabinet, which deals specifically with the foreign terrorist fighter phenomenon. That phenomenon is included in the particular amendments, however, but there is a more detailed approach to come on that, which I'll speak about briefly in just a little while. That's the legislative side. On the operational side, as you would be aware, the Office of the Attorney General engaged in the creation of an anti-terrorism desk at the AG's office. And very specifically, we took the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, which have been in existence since 2010 on anti-terrorism, which had nothing to show. And we operationalized that law by engaging in very aggressive listings of terrorist organizations. Specifically, in November 2015, there were no listings under the Attorney General's office, which has the specific obligation to do listings under Section 22B of the Anti-Terrorism Act. We are now at 333 listings in the period of several months that we've put it into effect. Specifically, on the legislative end, we are taking to Parliament to be laid this Friday an anti-terrorism amendment bill which seeks to do a number of things. And permit me to go through these things with you because I think it's important to detail them. I wouldn't normally detail them in this fashion, but it's important to inform now. What we're doing is we're specifically attending to the deficiencies observed in the CFATF anti-terrorism marking of Trinidad and Tobago. We are allowing for specific provisions to allow us to meet with the United Nations resolutions, which we have not been fully compliant on, specifically recommendations and resolutions 1267 of 1989, where we had to do further activity in designations. What we're doing is the following: that there would be differences in our society, but that we are committed to the age of consent for marriage being 18 years old, and the rationale behind that was stated on the Parliament floor. It's a serious gender bias issue where 98% of the persons involved were all female, and we consider that this is a position like other countries where the 18-year-old rule should apply. On the state of emergency point, I'll answer that by saying this: Trinidad and Tobago's taxpayers are being called upon, have been called upon, and will very shortly be subject to further calls to pay millions of dollars in damages for false imprisonment and malicious prosecution, because the last state of emergency called by the last government resulted in, I think, one person only of the many thousands of people detained actually facing some court issues. That resulted comparatively in murder numbers looking almost the same. The only difference between the state of emergency called by the last government and the murders resulting after that and now is that back then we voted for legislation which was special majority legislation and supported every anti-crime measure. The Minister of National Security said something yesterday which was so strong. Said it today, sorry. Mice man, killed as he has been publicly, was promptly let out of jail when the Bail Amendment Act fell. I wonder if Mrs. Prasad Biswas has anything to say about that. Because we supported the bail amendments every single time they came up to deal with those situations, to give law enforcement a fighting chance. And to this day, they cannot explain their position for not supporting it. Would Mice Man have been out? No. Why was he out? The Bail Act fell. Who caused the Bail Act to fall? The UNC. So we're dealing with a very different scenario in Trinidad and Tobago between the PNM's position in 2010 to 15 and now.
Okay, last.
I do have a question. I just want to make a statement. Please allow me to make it. And it's on behalf of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, I think most of them, a lot who I've spoken to, they would support moves, obviously, to make the country a safer place. At this point in time, there's a perception that it's not safe. I can show you my Facebook feed. There are women out there posting up, I've been followed by this man, I'm in Trinity Mall. They're calling out places, Pembroke Street, Port of Spain, man in a dark tinted van. And I mean, we're all for the laws, yes, but in the meantime that it takes to get operationalized and in place and funds, etc., I think they're calling out for action now. And whereas Minister of National Security, you're coming out and you're saying that assurances, you're trying to give these citizens assurances that the country is safer unless they actually see visibly that something is being done. The perception will continue to go. And we do have laws. We do have laws.
We'll hear this afternoon from both the Attorney General and the Minister of National Security, in addition to some legislation that's being taken to Parliament for very specific areas that are on the international front and at the forefront internationally, that things are being done. We've said consistently that we are very concerned because we too are citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. We have been working along with the law enforcement agencies who are statutorily charged with the responsibility of keeping us, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, secure and safe, and that work has been going on. In fact, we had an emergency meeting with National Security Council, which is our governmental interaction with them, just this week. So we're very much on top of it. It was yesterday, and we are working along with them as much as we can. And the Minister of National Security is driving the government's position along with the law enforcement agencies. I'd like to thank you all very much for your patience here this afternoon and for your time. Take care.
We're expanding the definition of property of funds for terrorism, and we're specifically going to include oil and other natural resources. You see, what happens is the terrorism financing is often perceived to be just in cash. In reality, there's a lot of in-kind, and other resources can be used to fund terrorist organizations. So what we did is to broaden the definition. We proposed the broadening of the definition as to the type of property that can be used. Secondly, we're expanding the definition of terrorist to include persons who contribute to the commission of a terrorist act or the financing of terrorism by individual terrorists. So what we're doing there is to broaden the aspects and the fringes of what you consider terrorists to be. If you fund it in any form or fashion, whether you are an entity or not, if you're an individual, you are going to be captured by this position. We're redefining a terrorist act. The law as drafted under the previous incarnations of government defined terrorism in a definition section, coming out of an analysis of the case law that we have specifically done. We've observed that it would be more prudent from a legal point of view to actually include better definitions in the body of the substantive laws. So we're specifically looking to any argument that there can be in relation to this law to make sure that it withstands judicial scrutiny. We're looking to extend the scope of the act to cover offenses committed outside of Trinidad and Tobago. Now that's a very important position because, as you know, the allegation exists that persons may travel outside of this country, participate in events in other countries, and what we want to do is to specifically capture any form of activity that can be linked to that form. We're also looking to extend specific offenses to cover the threat to commit or taking preparatory steps. You see, when one looks to what terrorism is, very often nobody rolls up and says, I am a terrorist and I have done this. Perhaps you may see that in foreign jurisdictions where ISIS may claim an event or Al-Qaeda may claim an event. But it's important for us to be able to capture the fringes around it so that taking any preparatory steps or threatening to deal with it is also included. We're looking as well to expand the offenses for the provision of services for the commission of terrorist acts or financing of terrorism and the collection of property. So if you participate by providing a service, again, this is attaching more than just the perpetrator who commits the pulling of a trigger or some physical act. You're now catching anybody who can better facilitate their operation, putting the population, therefore, upon notice to check, double check, and triple check. If you're sending money to someone elsewhere, you think he or she may be involved in certain positions, well, you're going to be caught by these type of operations in the law. We are criminalizing, by proposal, the joining of a terrorist organization and attending or receiving training. Again, this attacks those people who go abroad, supposedly, who say that they are going to visit certain areas and attend for training, which they say is for some aspect of study or some other position, where we're targeting that activity. Because they may, prior to that, allege that they weren't involved in any act of terrorism, but if you're going to go to certain places and receive certain doctrine and certain training, you're going to be caught by this position. We're then going to, and this is a very serious one, we're criminalizing travel for the purpose of committing a terrorist act and deeming persons who commit such offenses as foreign terrorist fighters. Let me repeat that. We propose to criminalize travel for the purpose of committing a terrorist act, and the definition of terrorist act is extremely broad in the recasted version. We're also going, and this is a very far-reaching and novel approach, we're allowing for the Minister of National Security to designate a geographical area and say that travel to or remaining in that area would constitute a presumption that the travel was for a terrorist act. Let me explain that. The Minister of National Security, by way of this proposal, will have the authority to deem a part of a country, never a whole country, a part of a country as a declared geographical region. For instance, Raqqa in Syria, where we hear that people go for certain terrorist indoctrination or activity. That can be declared as a geographical area, and if you travel to that area, you are going to have a presumption put upon you in law that you have gone there for a terrorist purpose. Obviously, there's a balance to that in the law as proposed, which is that you must give the Minister of National Security and certain other agencies notice that you intend to travel. So you can go there, but you're required to give notice, both when you go and when you come back. Because one of the key aspects to dealing with an anti-terrorism drive is to know who has gone where and why, when they go and when they come back, so that surveillance can be had. Because operationally, it is not just Trinidad and Tobago, which is engaged in very active surveillance as we are. We are in active cooperation with our international partners, the English, the Americans, other jurisdictions, and we share. The minute someone goes out by way of information, we call our foreign counterparts and they're dealt with and tracked right through the purpose. But if you travel to this declared geographical area, you're going to be met with a presumption that you've gone there for a nefarious activity, and the burden upon proving your innocence is now shifted. Understand all of this by way of due process. Of course, the courts are involved. We're also providing, as I said, the system for permits and exemptions, because people may genuinely go there. For instance, as you know, I am a person of Arab descent on my father's side. I do have family in an area, just giving an example. Let's say Iraq, where my family comes from. You may go there for a lawful reason. There's a death in the family, you have to deal with something. So there must be a system, as we recognize we have many citizens from other countries who may or may not be caught by that, to allow for exemptions and permissions. The next thing that we're doing is that we're revising the system for designating individuals and entities as terrorists, and we're applying financial sanctions against them upon the request of other countries. Right now, we don't have in law the ability to receive a request from another jurisdiction easily under the anti-terrorism law to do designations under the Anti-Terrorism Act. And a designation means that you are declared to be a terrorist entity, and then after designation in the court, the application for forfeiture and seizure and forfeiture of your property can be made, which is what we've done now 333 times since November of 2015, forgive me. We're also providing a mechanism for the ability for Trinidad and Tobago to propose names to the United Nations Security Council. Previously, there was a one-way street where you just dealt with the UN's position, but we're allowing for us to be able to put positions forward. We're broadening, by way of proposal, the power of law enforcement agencies to gather information to cover documents, computers, and electronic devices. Because obviously, you may have these allegations of terrorism, but how do you prove it? The ability to reach into the evidential domain is critical if you want to have a successful prosecution in a court of law. We're also going to revise the provisions for investigation of suspected terrorists, and we're broadening that and deepening that. We're proposing to revise provisions relating to the gathering of information by the Financial Intelligence Unit, because our view is that it wasn't broad enough and that the FIU needs to have very specific, broadened power to tie in suspected activities. Let me give you an example. Someone goes to their bank, borrows a loan, and the loan is for travel to a foreign jurisdiction where you suspect that there may be untoward activity. You may or may not notice that the travel information shows to what appears to be a permanent move or a move for an extended period for instance, family members. As you've heard allegations around the world that people travel with women and their children, etc. Well, this allows the FIU the ability to broaden powers of investigation by accessing information which otherwise would have been a little bit difficult to manage. Again, that is the independent entity of the FIU. We are also looking to revise the provisions for seizure and forfeiture of terrorist property, coming out of the operationalization of the seizure provisions which we have done in court for the first time as a country in the period since this government has been in control of the governance system. What we have is we've learned some lessons from the judicial process, and we're tightening up these particular positions. This breadth of work has been ongoing for many months. It just happens that the conversation in the national community is on this topic right now. This is what the bill looks like. It's a very large and thick piece of work. Clearly, it involved a significant amount of activity and enterprise, and we're very grateful to our foreign partners, but that's just stage one. The stage two, which I alluded to, and I'll give you a hint into it, as I said before, it involves the specific phenomenon of foreign terrorist fighters. We are not only dealing with that FTF phenomenon, but we're also looking at the amendment of the evidential rules to allow for circumstantial evidence to have weight and authority in the courts of law. Let me explain that. Very often you may get a video rumored to be something on the internet showing a nefarious activity. Supposedly, allegations have been made, certainly, that there's citizens of Trinidad and Tobago out there. Well, now we're asking the courts to look at the evidential standard and the admissibility of evidence in a different way. So we're looking at a very specific approach. Again, this has been a work in progress which has involved our international cooperation and our local cooperation. I'd like to assure Trinidad and Tobago that the local operationalization and surveillance and security positions is very active. These amendments which we propose are born out of analysis and looking at where the weaknesses in the systems exist. We have disclosed exactly what we're doing to our international partners, and they have been very generous in their support and very vocal in their support as to what we're doing. And we're very pleased to announce these measures to the country. We propose to take this to Parliament and to have a serious discussion in the Parliament, including, if necessary, the need for a joint select committee. One obviously has to appreciate that the Parliament has a view as a legislature, and therefore we are very open to these provisions. I will add that the law as drafted does not contain special majority laws, because we have been very careful to ensure that the laws are tightened, but that we as a government are careful in the approach to ensure that the very best is done for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago in the confines of the systems that we work in. That deals with the positions on terrorism. There's another very large item that I wish to speak to you about. And obviously you appreciate that the anti-terrorism work that we're doing is in relation to our crime-fighting strategies, because the flow back of terrorists, foreign terrorist fighters, is a significant position for one to contemplate as a country, as many countries around the world do. We're all obliged by the FATF recommendations to do this, and Trinidad and Tobago is leading the way in the jurisdiction on this work. I can guarantee you that, having come off as the chairman of CFATF, that we are definitely leading the pack on this. Another very important anti-crime measure which fits into the architecture is how we treat with the laws on the roads of Trinidad and Tobago. We know that policing is a serious activity. The police are being called upon to provide man-hours for detection and conviction. The police are being called to crime scenes, and the police are being called to the courts. The police have to spread their time in managing the productivity of their hours, and therefore it's extremely critical. You would have heard me say, and I want to now tell you why I said it. You would have heard me say that murders and crimes and criminality are not committed on donkey back again. They're committed in cars, in vehicles. And that was to allude to the work which we have been doing for the last year in not only proposing laws, but operationalizing systems. I'm very pleased to say the Judiciary of Trinidad and Tobago, the Ministry of Works and Transport, the Licensing Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, the iGov and Technology Departments of Trinidad and Tobago, and the Office of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, we have been working assiduously for the last year on a package of laws to treat with criminality on the roads, and to treat with the man-hours in the courts, and to treat with the man-hours of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. Statistically, and we will deliver a significant amount of statistics very shortly, statistically, there are roughly 23,000 cases in court every year in the traffic division of the court alone. Of that 23,000, roughly 30% result in a conviction or a fine or some position. The vast majority, approximately 70% of cases, just fall apart. But understand this, a policeman had to turn up in court 100% of the time for 30% of the success. And therefore that is police man-hours at risk and cost. And while the police could be engaged in detection and conviction of more serious matters, the traffic court has absorbed a significant amount of time. That has been complicated by the fact that your traffic laws require, if you get a ticket in Mayaro, that you have to go down in the courts which have jurisdiction in that area to deal with the offense. If you get a ticket in San Fernando, you must turn up in San Fernando even though you live in Charlottesville. So we were looking at the ease and functionality as well. Further to that, we were looking at the lawlessness on the roads and the fact that people have been allowed the perception, which is near reality, that there were no consequences to these things. So what we've done in a package of amendments, we've taken the approach to bring to life what Trinidad and Tobago has been talking about for a long time. We've been talking about a motor vehicle authority. We've been talking about ease of doing business, electronic payment of tickets, the ability to not turn up in a court in some other part of Trinidad and Tobago where you live elsewhere. We've been talking about freeing up police time to be engaged in dealing with criminality and anti-driving, anti-criminality, and pushing that point. And what we've done is to introduce now a bill which is going to the Parliament on Friday as well. And this bill seeks to make amendments to the motor vehicle and road traffic laws. It's an amendment to those laws. And we are, number one, we're identifying certain offenses as violations, and I'll explain that in a moment. We're dealing with the establishment of red light camera systems. I'll explain that in a moment. And we're dealing with the reform of fixed penalty systems. Let me deal with the three aspects. In our laws right now, all of the breaches of the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act are offenses. Under an offense, you've got to have court time, police time. Because the minute you get a ticket, it's a ticket for an offense. What we're doing now is we are recasting certain offenses, and a lot of them, as violations. The minute you move from offense to violation, the violation is met with a penalty where you have to pay fines. You have the ability to contest the fines. You must show cause. You can choose to pay the cash amounts. But when you choose to pay the cash amounts, Trinidad and Tobago will now be welcomed into the ability to do it online at places other than the court. at approved centers. We are also, by this movement away from violations to offenses, we're relieving the police from the need to attend on every occasion, every time, 23,000 times a year for the current load. And we are also freeing up judicial time. Understand how simple but how radical the move that we're talking about is for the need to deal with criminality. You need judicial time. You need police time. You want to make it such that citizens are encouraged to pay their offenses, etc. But, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't pay your violations, it's going to attach to your licensing and your vehicle registrations. Bottom line is you can run, but you can't hide. When you come to renewal of licenses or motor vehicle registration renewals, yearly certificates, etc., you will not be permitted to transact the business unless you've cleared the arrears. So we're now gaining 70% revenue which was lost. We're freeing up police time, and we're freeing up judicial time and courtroom time, because you now have more courts for business. We're allowing approved payment centers. And the great news about this is that while we were drafting these laws, we were operationalizing the system, which is why I mentioned to you the judiciary, the licensing authority, in fact the Ministry of Finance payment positions, the Attorney General's office, etc. We've actually, ladies and gentlemen, done something which was stopped in 2010. All of the digitization of the records under the last government's tenure was stopped in 2010. We went into the licensing authority and we backfilled the work which was not done for 5 years, and we have now brought the computerization system up so that we can operationalize a digital system. Hence, you understand now why the Minister of Works and Transport was able to launch the new position for licenses. It's because you really required the position of knowing who was licensed for what and which car was owned by whom on a digital matrix, because when you get these things digitally now, you know who the owner of the car is or who the person who is driving by way of licensing is. So having digital records was critical, and that work has been backfilled, and the progressive work is ongoing. That ties in now to the position of dealing with the establishment of a red light camera system. We've heard about this for many, many years. We're very pleased to say that the reality of this is now here. If you break a red light, you will get a picture taken and you will receive a citation in the mail or otherwise telling you that you have done this. And it will be met by a sanction which will be collected by way of citation. You do have the ability to challenge. You do have the ability to have challenge not only at the court if you choose, but also at the licensing authority when they tell you, look, you can no longer transact business until you've cleared up certain things. That, ladies and gentlemen, is going to allow us to operationalize the camera systems on multiple traffic lights throughout Trinidad and Tobago. Any day, any time that you break these traffic lights, you pass under the traffic lights, you are going to be spotted and you're going to be known. The other area is the reform of the fixed penalty system. And in reforming that fixed penalty system, it ties into the positions that I was just speaking about, which is the digital and other arrangements of the licensing authority, the ease of payment and transacting business. But you will be shocked when we deliver statistics on another occasion at how much revenue the country loses and how much criminality is encouraged because you can't have an effect. Ladies and gentlemen, very soon, in a matter of months, we'll be speaking to the replacement of license plates and to the inclusion of RF frequency tags. And we will also be telling you about the introduction of archways across our major roads and thoroughfares, and as your RF tag passes under archways, you will be known in the system. This allows law enforcement a better chance at tracking criminal activity, because you're also having the ability for your camera system to go to work. And the Minister of National Security will tell you about what Trinidad and Tobago has purchased very soon and put into effect in terms of the full operationalization of the National Operations Center, which will be the mind hub to manage how information and data flows and what responsive time looks like. This, ladies and gentlemen, these two pieces of law that I've brought to you today are intended to go to Parliament. We're open again, even though in this law I have also been very careful to avoid special majority legislation support. We are still open to Joint Select Committee, and if the need arises, discussion there, because we consider that these are radical improvements to Trinidad and Tobago. Very shortly, I will be unveiling the work in the criminal justice sector, which has been 16 months of extreme hard work to make sure that our system actually operates so that if you do the crime, you will do the time in proper, quick fashion at the courts. This conference doesn't permit me the opportunity to give you this information because it's a lot of information. They articulate very well with what I have just described on the motor vehicle aspects, etc. But we are very firm in our view as a government that the systemic problems in Trinidad and Tobago, which have not been addressed for a very, very long time, require dedicated analysis and attention. But I want to tell you the difference in the approach that we have taken. Normally, governments go about passing law, then getting the operationalization done in a sequential order. Let me give you an example. The DNA Act came out in 2012, the Electronic Monitoring Act in 2012, and nothing was done up to 2017. We are very pleased to see, for instance, in the electronic monitoring, that we're talking about not only the anklets, but the telecommunication system, the building from which they will operate, the technology platform which will deal with the geo-positioning systems, the response force to capture those who are in breach of the anklet systems. All of this done simultaneously. On the DNA end, not only the appointment of a custodian, which was not done at all, even though the law was passed since 2012. Yes, we have appointed a custodian, but we're going further because we're at the cusp of dealing with getting the database for the entire prison population and arrestees done within a 6-week period. You see, it's good enough to have laws. The question is whether you operationalize the laws. And we will, week by week, month by month, be introducing Trinidad and Tobago to the work which this government has very silently done because we could not speak prematurely. What the population wants to see is results. And we're now ready to show the result of the hard work that has been put in addressing the systemic problems of Trinidad and Tobago. I propose to pass over to the Minister of National Security.
Allow me, first of all, on behalf of the Ministry of National Security and the government of Trinidad and Tobago, to extend sincerest condolences to Nadia Sims' family, her parents, her siblings, her colleagues, for her passing, and to let you know that we certainly condemn that kind of activities that takes place in destroying the lives of our young people, especially the young ladies in Trinidad and Tobago. So our deepest condolences. We are no doubt in the Ministry of National Security concerned of the murder rate that took place in the month of January, which saw us the highest month of January for previous years at the rate of 52. And so we have looked at the type of murder, and we know that murder, of course, is the barometer by which we are measured. Notwithstanding serious crime may have gone down, the issue for us is to treat the murder rate, because that's the barometer by which we are measured. So we have looked at the categories of murder that have occurred in 2016 and what have started the year in 2017. And looking at those statistics, we looked at them in 4 categories. One, in terms of drug-related murders, gang-related murders, murders as a result of domestic violence, and of course those are unknown in terms of the motives being determined. And when we looked at that, we therefore looked at different strategies to deal with, in particular, the gang-related murders and the drug-related murders, because we feel that in those areas are areas that we can do some measures of preventions. And so you would see some very focused activities by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, supported by the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, in respect of disrupting, to a large extent, the gang activities and the drug-related. So you would see a number of initiatives with respect to the drug blocks, and when I say drug blocks, with respect from the single person involved in drugs to the organized groups that are involved in drugs. There'll be an intensified effort to treat with the drug blocks throughout Trinidad and Tobago. And so on, also to treat with the gang relators, the formation of gangs that have been able to transcend our national security landscape. You would also see us pursuing or treating or encouraging the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to assist us insofar as the domestic violence is concerned, because that's an area that we do not have much control to start with. But however, while we know that crime is a very symptomatic, is a social problem, we feel that if we work together so far as that is concerned, then we can bring some measure of relief with respect to especially domestic violence. Now, the Ministry of National Security provides the strategic directions for law enforcement and agencies of the state to deal with issues of crime and criminality. And so over the years and the coming months, you will see us reinforcing our strategic pillars of deterrence, prediction, prosecution, detection, and rehabilitation. And the AG mentioned a while ago that you will see us launching in the next couple of weeks or so a very revamped and technologically sound National Operations Center, which we have been working at for some time. And we're just about ready to launch that. And what that will give us, using modern technologies, to give us a better situation awareness of what happens throughout Trinidad and Tobago. It will bring to bear that common operating picture that taps into our camera system, that taps into our licensing office, that taps into almost all the areas throughout Trinidad and Tobago, to bring it in that common operating space that will allow us to respond more directly and more immediately to crimes that are committed throughout Trinidad and Tobago. And that will be launched in the not too distant future. We continue also to build on our deterrence strategic pillar. And that deterrence pillar would see us again allowing a more intense presence throughout our highways, throughout our streets, in our inner cities, and in our so-called hotspots. We're going to be intensifying that deterrence measure, and again, the deterrence will go so far as to looking at some of the minor crimes that are being committed in Trinidad and Tobago. Because while we focus on the major crimes, we believe that if we start tackling the minor crimes that are committed on our highways and our byways, we'll go back to even looking at areas of tinted vehicles, of a number of search and stop along our highways and our inner cities. Because we believe that if we start from the small crimes, while we concentrate on the larger crimes, there's an important message to be sent, and continuing to look after those who commit the small offense. Because to a large extent, those who commit the small offenses are sometimes the same people who commit the larger offenses. So you're going to see an intensified effort by our Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, supported again by the Defense Force, in all areas with respect to crime and criminalities throughout Trinidad and Tobago. We look at our deterrence pillar not only with respect to our inner cities, but a deterrence pillar with respect to our maritime security environment. And so the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, by reason of the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard, will be also intensifying their patrols in our maritime security environment, especially within our Gulf of Paria, our South Coast, and our North Coast. Because based again on intelligence, we believe that we also have to prevent the penetration of illegal guns, illegal arms, illegal ammunitions, and even the trafficking in persons from coming into our space. So you also see an intensified effort with respect to that deterrent pillar The deterrent pillar also speaks to intensified and targeted operations. So when we've looked at what occurred to us by January 2017, we have to launch, really is a different and a more intense offensive. We are actually going to be taking that fight towards who we consider to be that small percentage of individuals who are continuing in a life of crime and continue to perpetuate criminal activities in Trinidad and Tobago. In terms of our detection pillar, we have been building up our crime scene investigators, and we continue to do so, continue to train them, and we have been liaising with some international partners for assistance in developing that capacity. What you will see also is an increase in the operational side of the Strategic Services Agency. So far, we've built the National Operations Center. We have looked at the National Intelligence Agency part of the Strategic Services Agency. What we are doing now is building the operational element of the Strategic Services Agency that would complement the work being done by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in a more dedicated and focused manner. We are also looking at strengthening our prosecution pillar by engaging and having discussions with the judiciary. And I must say that is again as a whole of government approach, because you have heard the Attorney General mention a while ago a number of situations where the Ministry of National Security is working together with the Attorney General. We are also working with the Chief Justice and the judiciary to look at in terms of our prosecution, because ladies and gentlemen, you understand that while the law enforcement will do their work in terms of arresting, when persons appear before the court, there's a timeliness in which certain things must take place. And so we're having that kind of conversation with the Chief Justice to fill that spectrum from arrest to before the courts and subsequent incarceration. And so the other pillar speaks to what happens in terms of incarceration, in terms of the prison rehabilitation and restoration. To this end, we are concerned about the amount of remandees we have, which is where most of the situations are in our prisons. And I'd certainly like to say that the video conference facility is about 68% completed right now, and we are ensuring as much as possible to ensure that that facility is completed within the next 2 months or so. Because we believe that doing so, we'll be able to treat with the matters, especially the remandees, in a more responsible and a more efficient manner. The Attorney General mentioned a while ago with respect to the question of the electronic monitoring mechanism. And so the government had taken a position to look at what has happened in other jurisdictions. And we are in fact having 3 different presentations, one from the United Kingdom this week, another one from Canada next week, and one from the US the following next week also, to give us the kind of systems and the kind of providers that they have used in the whole question of electronic monitoring bracelets and the mechanism that are in place. But even while we do so, we are also in the process of hiring the manager and shaping the whole management framework for that system, and also looking at our local service provider to make sure that that again comes on stream in the shortest possible time. So what you will see, ladies and gentlemen, again, is an intensified effort by law enforcement, supported by the other agencies of national security, the Strategic Services Agency, the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, in an effort based on, again, based on our analysis of the situation, where we must have concentration of force at the right time and place in various jurisdictions. You would have seen that we have, to date, have another forward base in Enterprise. We have had one in Sugar Trace before. We also have another base in Beverly Heights, yes. And so we'll continue to look at different kind of areas to focus the attention of the law enforcement, where we believe that the areas that generate a certain kind of behavior, all in an effort to ensure that we stem the tide of criminality and criminal behavior in Trinidad and Tobago. Ladies and gentlemen, that ends my presentation. And just to give again a sense of assurance that the agencies of the Ministry of National Security will continue to work assiduously to assure the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, to give them a sense of comfort as we continue to treat the incidences of crime and criminality in Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much. You all have heard from the Attorney General, the Minister of National Security. If